So last week we had some fun as we began a new series called Famous Last Words, dealing with leadership lessons from the story of Noah in the book of Genesis. We began by looking at some famous last words kind of in a comical way from Elvis Presley and Jack Daniel and Leonardo da Vinci. But this week we begin this message for this weekend in a little bit more of a somber way, as we remember the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 terrorist attacks and our response. I am Pastor John Rudolph from the North Carroll Cooperative Parish, and this is the weekend of September the 12th, 2021, and I'm out front of Company 2 here in Hampstead, Maryland, our volunteer fire department that serves this area and this portion of our parish. It was September 11th, 2001, where we experienced one of those we remember where we are moments. Unfortunately, it was for a tragedy that had hit our country, our shores, as terrorists took over multiple planes and hit the Twin Towers of New York City, the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., and then one particular plane that was headed towards the West Coast had turned around and was heading back to Washington as well. And then it was that flight number 93, that went down in the hills of Pennsylvania, that where we get one of the most famous last words of the modern era, and that is, "Let's roll." And that is in reference to the last words from Todd Beamer, who was one of the passengers on Flight 93, who helped, along with the crew and some other passengers, to overtake the terrorists. And they put that plane down. Tragically, all were lost, but possibly saved the White House or thousands of other people in Washington, D.C. Let's roll. Famous last words from Todd Beamer. This weekend, in fact, is the 20th anniversary, and so we will take a moment and take some time to honor our own first responders here in the parish, in Hampstead, Manchester, Upperco, that serve us honorably, and we give thanks for them. It is also from first responders that we can learn a little bit about what it means to lead during crisis. And the toughest of times, we find that during these crises, it reveals true leaders, and it reveals qualities from leaders. And so we will learn that this weekend as well. Noah himself finds himself in the midst of a crisis, not just a crisis, not just a world pandemic like we're going through now, but he is near total annihilation of all creation. And so he finds himself being called by God. Last week we looked at how God saw something in Noah that maybe he didn't even see in himself, and how that is comforting, knowing that God calls us and equips us and sees things in us as well. We learned that from studying the first part of Noah's story. So now, as we turn towards the ark and the building of the ark and what is to come in the flood, and we certainly don't know what Noah's technical skills were. We most likely know from the scriptures that he was a farmer, but we don't know if he had any carpentry skills. We certainly don't know or have any evidence that he ever even built a fishing boat. But we do know for sure he had never built anything like an ark, something to that magnitude. And so you can imagine, as we hear these words from scriptures, Noah's response, his word to this call from God, might have turned this week to, "I can't do it." So last week, "I can't see it." This week, as he hears the instructions, "I can't do it. This is going to take like 100 years. But hear these words from our scriptures. God said to Noah, "The end has come for all creatures. Since they have filled the earth with violence, I am now about to destroy them along with the earth. So make a wooden ark. Make the ark with nesting places and cover it inside and out with tar. This is how you should make it: 450 long, 70 feet wide, 45 feet high. Make a roof for the ark and complete it 1 foot from the top. Put a door in its side. In the hold below, make the second and third decks. I am now bringing the floodwaters over the earth to destroy everything on the earth and about to take its last, everything on its earth is about to take its last breath. But I will set up my covenant with you. You will go into the ark together with your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives. From all living things, from all creatures, you are to bring a pair, male and female, into the ark with you to keep alive. From each kind of bird, from each kind of livestock, and from each kind of everything that crawls on the ground, a pair from each will go in with you to stay alive. Take some from every kind of food and stow it as food for you and for the animals. Noah did everything exactly as God commanded him to do. We hear these great details about the ark. We don't know exactly what the measurements mean, the ark, because the cubit is a range of numbers of what it could have been. But what we do know, it was extremely large. Again, 100-year project. It took forever to build. It was so big that some scholars say that it could have held 2.25 million sheep. It's a lot of animals. That's a big space. It's a lot of smells and bells and whistles too. We don't know, the interesting thing that we do know about the ark is the dimensions. So we don't know exactly, how it played out in terms of the length and width and height, but the dimensions described in what I just read to you, the height, width, and length dimensions, the ratio for that, 30, 5, and 3, were the same ratios used for shipbuilding all the way into the early 1900s. And so Noah, or God here, was on to something for sure. Some of the ways the ark is described here with the multiple decks and the door in the side reminded Dave Stawick, who's on our preaching team, it reminded him of an aircraft carrier. And so he had some interesting thoughts on that in terms of the way it might have looked and what it looked like. One interesting fact that we'll talk about here in a moment is it had no steering wheel. And so once the animals and once Noah and his family were locked in on the boat, God was in control and God was steering. Noah's part was to gather the animals and to build the ark. But you again can imagine, it doesn't say it in the scriptures, but you can imagine Noah saying, I can't do it. Famous last words. But words that should not be in your vocabulary, should not be in my vocabulary when God calls us to leadership. The last verse in this passage is the key, a recurring theme. Noah did exactly as God commanded him to do. And so that's the point. At the end of the day, when it was all said and done, with the crisis at hand, the leader, Noah, simply does everything exactly the way God had commanded him. So it didn't matter, again, what he saw himself. It didn't matter what qualifications he had. It didn't matter whether he thought he could do it. All he had to do was show up and do exactly what God had commanded him to do. Again, remember, a recurring theme. God equips those who God calls. And this passage is a detailed account of what is to be done and by whom. The last word in this passage, Noah did exactly that. It's a great lesson for us, especially during difficult times, especially during the times that we found ourselves in 2001 when terrorists attacked us on our land here in America. Even now today when we're in a pandemic and another wave is upon us, we have to figure out when God is calling us to lead during these difficult times, what will these crises reveal about us? Will we be willing to answer the call? Will we be willing to do exactly what God has called us to do? Or will we be distracted by our own whims and our own experiences or distracted by others? Remember, the key part of this passage before we get to that last word is no steering wheel. And so it's a great metaphor. Many followers will try to get you off track. Sometimes we'll even try to get ourselves off track and we'll forget that we are to follow God exactly in what God has laid out. And we get distracted by that. We want to steer the ship. And a lot of times at the end of the day, when we failed as leaders, we'll be looking for blame, and the blame simply lies is we got distracted from God's plan, or we allowed ourselves to get distracted from God's plan. And so, as we sit out here in front of the fire department and we're thinking about these lessons from Noah, we're thinking about how it is that God calls us to lead, we're remembering 9/11, a whole lot of things here coming together at once to give us a clear message on what it means to lead during crisis. One of the things that happened here in our own communities on 9/11 and the days following was a new perception or a new reality, a new way to think about our heroes in the fire department and the police department and EMTs. These guys and gals who, when they're sitting here in the firehouse and they get a call, they never know what that next call is going to be. They never know what kind of danger they may face. They never know when they're going to have to run up a building that's on fire and ready to collapse. They never know what dangers lie ahead or what crisis is next. They can't sit in here and say, well, I simply can't do it. I'm not going to go. No, when that bell goes off, when that whistle sounds, when the call comes across, they get in their trucks and they go and they do their job. And so we remembered that in the days following 9/11. So it wasn't just about the heroes that were in New York City or Washington, D.C., but heroes all across the country that helped us and showed us the way that what it means to lead during crisis. Every day, every call is a miniature crisis. And we look to their courage for strength and wisdom and models on what it means to lead during crisis. And so I'm thankful for the response on 9/11 and the days after. I'm thankful for our volunteers here in Hampstead and Manchester and Upper Cove. If you're listening from wherever you are on NCCP anywhere and you are a first responder, we're thankful for you. We also want you to, when you mark your attendance this week, there's a place on the attendance now where you can enter in prayers. Let us know that you're a first responder. Or if you have a family member that is a first responder, so that we can pray for you by name and we can thank you directly. And so with that, we give thanks for you, and we give thanks that God equips us as He calls us, and we give thanks in remembrance of 9/11, and we hope that you will see us again here on NCCP Anywhere next weekend as this series, Famous Last Words, continues. Amen.